us.
Well, Betsy, I was going to get upset about this in the last broadcast, but I'm glad that we have one just designated to this because then I can go slow and be calm. But we had already told everyone that there's going to be a war between Trump and the U.S. Fed. We had predicted that it would not happen until after the midterms, but we never expected, because it's never happened in history, that during the best economic time in U.S. history on every count, that the Fed would raise rates to try to slow it down because they said it's a hot box.
No, they're not. They're trying to destroy Trump. They're trying to destroy the world economy because they don't have any more tricks left.
Trump is so strong now he can defeat China, and the U.S. Fed is our enemy. They all have always been our enemy, and they're trying to stop our strength from squishing China. Trump would have squished China in another 6 months and gone down to zero tariffs without any trade problems at all, with China kissing our feet. What's going to happen now is going to be horrible. It's going to take a few minutes to describe this, but it's going to be that China is going to crash just like Japan crashed. Remember when Japan was doing all our manufacturing, they had more money than us, they came and they bought everything?
Okay, yes, I'll say yes.
Wow, that was what I asked some billionaires about this, and they said, oh, don't worry, we let them buy it all now. We buy it back pennies on the dollar. Well, how are you going to do that? They're dependent upon us with their manufacturing. Are they stupid? This is what the billionaires said. The same thing can be told of China. China has bought so many U.S. Treasury bonds. Let me just describe what's going on. The war with China has now come into America, and the U.S. Fed has become the agent of China. But remember, Dianne Feinstein is an agent of China. She is a spy. Mitch McConnell is an agent of China. He is a spy.
So
he is a treasonous, seditious spy, just like Dianne Feinstein. His wife, what's her name? Helene Chao.
Secretary of Transportation. I cannot understand how she even passed a security clearance to get that position.
I doubt she did. She's probably SES.
Yes, Senior Executive Service.
You don't have to have a clearance. You can be a Chinese spy and get a job as long as you're a Senior Executive Service member. They don't do background checks on them sometimes. You don't even have to state your nationality. You don't have to be a U.S. citizen. You can have one of the highest positions in the U.S. federal government, Senior Executive Service, and not even be a citizen. You can be a criminal. They don't check your criminal record either, let alone your security record. Oh, Lord, don't get me started. We are in a war with China, okay? We're going to be talking about that a lot with Michael McKibben because I didn't know how deep the economic thing was, and through research we were doing, it's led back to Shanghai. Now, we told you what was going on in Shanghai. This is what was going on. Now, this is hard to understand, folks. So I'm going to try to go slow. Betsy, stop me if I go too fast. Let's just see how to explain this. The U.S. economy, first off, currency wars, more important than wars with bombs, except that we lose our greatest treasure of our country, which is our people, our soldiers. But besides that, it's economic warfare that's the number one consideration. Cyber warfare, but cyber warfare is economic warfare. So everything comes back down to the U.S. Treasury, because everything either has a money link to it or it probably isn't very significant. So the war with China right now was a cyber war, which they backed off of, and then it's a tariff war, it's a trade war. But at one point they had bought so many U.S. Treasury bonds, which are what are issued by the U.S. Fed, which should be illegal, by the way. They should be controlled completely by the U.S. Treasury, and the U.S. Federal Reserve is not U.S., it is not federal, and it is not a reserve. It is a bunch of old-time bankers from Germany, from Holland, and especially from Britain, who got in at the beginning of the U.S. Federal Reserve and made a system that makes it look like U.S. taxpayers have something to do with it, but we don't. They also lie and say the U.S. Federal Reserve controls monetary policy. It doesn't. That is a lie. There's a committee that controls that, and it's made up of some members of the U.S. Federal Reserve Board, members of the Plunge Protection Team, as I call it. There's much more complicated names for it, and the Exchange Stabilization Fund in relationship to the U.S. Treasury and its actions, and how much money we print. So when China threatened us and they were going to sell back I forget, almost 50% of their U.S. Treasury bonds as a bomb to stop us from even wrinkling the flow of manufacturing and purchase of goods from China that was set up by Bill and Hillary Clinton when they allowed them to come into the World Trade Organization underneath the auspices of most favored nation trading status, which should have never happened because of there's, to this very day, the worst civil rights record in the world is China. So when Walmart then started making everything for America, and Hillary got on the Walmart board with my old friend Sam Walton, who was a setup because the Chinese came to Arkansas, northern Arkansas, and gave him infinite money through the Clintons to start this Chinese, basically it was a war against us. It's an economic war. If you take over someone's manufacturing, if it's critical manufacturing like microchips, which the Chinese did, or computers, which then we have to give them our intellectual property so that they can construct them for us, so they can manufacture them for us with people who make very little money, in some case child slave labor or slave labor. China is the number one place. So yes, folks, your laptop was probably made by someone who has been enslaved to do so. And it had Chinese chips on it with a mechanical engine on that chip that controls everything. They can remote control everything, aggressively remote control your computer. Trump got rid of this. So with the economic war that's going on, it wasn't just that all trade deals were simply sucking all of the money out of good American taxpayers, because they're not about assets, folks. They're about the flow of money. The globalists want the flow of money. New flow of money without any taxes on it. That's what it's all about. So that's the war going on right now. We've told you again and again, the real war is economic. We now suspect that Hillary Clinton is on the run, and that the reason she's on a book tour is so that at any moment, if she finds out, because she's got the certification, the digital key certification agreements through a company called Axiom, which has now changed its name a bunch of times, moved to Shanghai, China, and actually can access any FBI file, any CIA file. So Hillary will know when she's about ready to be indicted. Her security clearance has been taken, and the people involved with the crimes, trying to set up George Papadopoulos, Carter Page with these missing 33,000 emails and the whole scam that her Blackberries were smashed with a hammer and the laptops were smashed by the FBI. No, they're not. Christopher Wray says none of them were damaged. He has all of them. So when Hillary finds this out, that she's about ready to be indicted, she's going to go to Shanghai. No extradition. She is moving, it seems, a lot of her controls there. And basically we're getting ready to see that more than likely certain sanctions, because as Trump has been putting sanctions on all kinds of people, that's what got Reverend Brunson released, Andrew Brunson, from Turkey, was the sanctions put upon basically a Turkish criminal here in America.
Will Fethullah Gulen be shipped back soon?
He's dying, and he may actually already be dead. He has been already investigated by his compound has been raided repeatedly during this time when Trump was focusing just here at the end very strongly on getting Pastor Brunson released. And I would suspect that one of two things will happen, that Fethullah Gulen will either disappear, fake his death, or be extradited. But going back, China is in war with us. The U.S. Fed has now gone over to China. The U.S. Fed, the globalists, thought, along with Henry Kissinger and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the people who really own the principal shares behind these dummy asset management companies like Vanguard and T. Rowe and BlackRock and all the rest of them. Those are fake dummy asset management companies. You know how many BlackRocks there are? It's the same evil bankers, warlord bankers and brokers who owned the Fed too. They thought they were going to go to China and America had been sucked dry. They're incorrect. Trump came back. America's back. The U.S. Federal Reserve, here's what's going to happen. I predicted that they would raise. I predicted each time beforehand, and no one would have believed a prediction like that, because never in history has the Fed raised the interest rates so fast, so quick, in history, during the time that we have the best economic recovery and growth in history, there was only one reason to do that, folks, and that is to attempt to destroy the economic growth. But there was another reason for that. When the Fed raises rates, all kinds of things happen on the stock market. Now, as I've told you before, the Fed has invested through its central banks, all of its central banks, and the Fed itself. Remember, every few years, the Fed gives a bill to the U.S. Congress. It has never, ever been denied. Whatever the bill is, it's usually $20 billion. And we have to pay the Fed. That goes directly to those bankers. That does not go to the U.S. Federal Reserve. It doesn't go to anybody but the stockholders. And when they say that the president appoints some people to the U.S. Fed, that is true. When they say that they give money back to us, to the U.S. government, yes, they do. Do they represent us? Yes, they do. Do they hold most of our fluid gold? Okay, the gold we use to back up almost everything. Also, banks use it, and in foreign exchange, for some reason, the U.S. Fed has these vaults where they move gold bullion. Okay, that's all fake. They use that to move around to other banks, central banks, during audits, where they then have gold that doesn't belong to them. This is a scam. It's been going on for a long, long time. That is why Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, went out and audited Fort Knox. It's never been audited before. Now what's going to happen is the following. The Fed is at war with us. Trump has now opened warfare with the Fed. I told you this actually 2 interest rate raises ago, and I told you what's going to happen, but now it has been accelerated. The Fed has told its central banks, its 12 central banks, first off, when Trump came to power, because it was supposed to crash. Remember, George Soros bet $1 billion the market was going to crash after Trump was elected. It actually skyrocketed. He lost over $1 billion. That's what was supposed to happen. When Hillary came to power, the stock market was going to crash, and they were going to work on a new system, and the International Monetary Fund was going to completely be restructured to screw every country in the world except America. We control, depends on the time, anywhere from 91 to 93% of the world currency. No one can compete against us. When the Chinese sold the U.S. Treasury bonds they were holding as an extortion over our head, the U.S. Treasury printed trillions of dollars in basically useless paper, fiat currency, and paid off both Russia and China, who joined together in an attempt to crash us by selling the U.S. Treasury bonds on the open market. What happened? They were immediately bought up less than 1 second after they came up on the market, both the Russian and the Chinese U.S. Treasury bonds. Why? Because those were off-book purchases from the U.S. Fed with fake fiat currency. They can't manipulate us with U.S. federal Treasury bonds. So we simply printed the money and bought them, and nothing even twitched. We were all told for 20 years or more that, this was the most vulnerable point in our entire system. And then we were told for years that it was going to happen and the Chinese were just going to make mincemeat of us. They put it all with the Russians in collusion on the market, bought within less than 1 second, both. Fake money. That's what happens when you control the currency. So what did they do? Both Russia and China then said they were going to get a gold-backed currency. I laugh because the CIA, the U.S. military, and then later the OSS, later the CIA, stole all the money, all the gold from the people we were at war with in World War I and II. So after World War II, the Chinese gold, what is called the Yamashita gold, the gold that the Japanese had stolen from the Chinese, who had stolen it from everybody, and the Japanese stole it from everybody else in the East they could, buried it in the Philippines, and the rogue CIA found it. Members who had been previously Wild Bill Donovan and the whole crew. So he had a whole group, I forget what they called, the Tigers or something, that were looking all throughout the Philippines. So they had buried this gold in different holes and caves. It was also the German gold. As we know, The Bank for International Settlements was created by the German gold that was stolen from the Germans and literally from the teeth of the Jews. Literally, the Germans took the gold from the Jews' teeth, and it was a huge amount of gold, and that gold was reclaimed by the Bronfman family, and the Bank of International Settlements still is holding gold.
Now, people remember the name Bronfman because it's associated, that name, the daughters, the granddaughters, with this NXIVM group.
That's right, and all these rich people are connected to this weird sexual stuff. I don't know why. Anyway, the Bank for International Settlements still has a lot of gold. That's the reason we've paid out $50 million to Imelda Marcos, because Marcos sued us because it was his gold. We stole it from his islands, the Philippines. And so his wife got in on this and got money back from the Bank for International Settlements, money directly back from us because we took some of it into our treasury. And that is called, if you want to understand that, you just look up the Bush Hammer Project. Yeah, George Bush, that's right, rogue CIA, Hammer, Hammer. Anyway, the German gold, the Chinese gold has been manipulating the CIA banks like BCCI and HSBC, the bank that Mueller and Comey both worked for, Deutsche Bank and the Bank of New York and numerous other banks are just outright, Sun Bank, Stephen Halper's banks. Recently, who was it that came out? This is beautiful. Dr. Ford, her stepfather, her father-in-law runs one of these CIA banks. These CIA banks are known by everybody. They're used to launder money, and nobody seems to care.
And you're talking about the Ford, the chick who was with the Kavanaugh stuff.
Yes, Blasey Ford. Christina Blasey Ford, liar, who is CIA.
But you know who was another liar? Is this whole Federal Reserve System. Folks, this money is as fake as it can be. And just as soon as we don't put any more trust behind it and we wipe it off, then we can get back to a U.S. Treasury note. That's who needs to be issuing our money, the Treasury. The Federal Reserve is nothing but a private company that prints paper, and because the government recognizes it as money, they make it so. It's not. They can print as much as they want. It loses its value every day.
Now, here was their plan. Their plan was to crash the market as soon as Hillary came to power. Trump came to power, the market started to soar. The central bank said, 12 central banks working under the U.S. Federal Reserve said, what the heck? Hey, can't we get on this action? And they said, well, we've never bought stock in the New York Stock Exchange before because bankers and brokers shouldn't be ever allowed to be in the same room together. Because if you're a banker, you already have insider trading information that give you an advantage when you're a broker. It's insane that we allow bankers to be brokers on the stock exchange. Anyway, now we've allowed, by U.S. Federal Reserve order, the central banks, the 12 of them, to buy stock in the New York Stock Exchange until it soared to the highest levels in history beyond anything anyone could imagine. Now, 1/3 of the assets in the 12 central banks, the assets are on the stock market. Never in history has this ever happened. So, they not only is our currency strong, and their fake gold is being busted. See, the fake gold got busted, and they can't shift it around anymore because they have a real head of the U.S. Treasury who won't let that happen. So they can't play the gold games anymore. Oops. So they had to buy stocks. So now they're playing a stock game. The crash in the market recently was because the central banks, literally in public, were told to clean off their asset sheets, to sell their assets, to literally dump the stock. And so they started dumping it very slowly. Now, what's really interesting is that's okay because the high-frequency traders, which don't get me started on that, there's no stock market. High-frequency traders make it that they get in and out of a deal before anyone else has offered it. It's run by those companies that have direct access because the depository trust certification comes automatic for them because they put up such huge amounts of money that ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange that owns the New York Stock Exchange, allows this to happen once they came to own it. So the stock market is rigged. Central banks are dumping all their stock. It's being bought immediately by not only people who are being fooled because their 401ks are going up, it looks like, in their stock portfolio, but everything's going up. How can they not get in on Facebook, Google get multi-billion-dollar lawsuits and their stock still goes up? Shows you it's fake. The whole FANG, the Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix and Google control a huge part of the stock market. They've been attacked recently. They're going down, folks, but their stock only, it shudders now and then, but it goes right back up. Because why? Why does it go down? Why did Amazon go down one day? Huge amount. Good old Bezos, fake Bezos, who knows nothing, does nothing, doesn't even go to work. Because Trump mentioned that he needed to pay the correct rate for U.S. mail. And he lost billions that day. But, within the next few days, it went right back up. So now Trump says you are going to pay the between 9 to 17% in your postal services, Amazon, that you have been subsidized for. And Trump is like, probably finally listened to us and said, can someone look into this? That's insane. Why are we subsidizing all FANG companies? And almost all high tech is all subsidized, including Verizon, Sprint, AT&T. They're all subsidized by our hard-earned tax dollars. So when he starts looking into these things, what's he finding? It's very easy. We're going to tell you what Trump is going to do. He's getting us into a war with the Fed to show that they're globalists. The Fed is now our enemy. And they're creating, every time they raise...
always been our enemy.
A war enemy. We are in a war. They are seditious traitors. They're not even Americans. They're globalists. They're in war with us, and they're in an economic war, which is the most powerful war you can have right now. And so Trump is saying, okay, I warned you. I warned you twice. I warned you 3 times. Now it's on. As soon as the midterms are over, you're going to see...
And he's told them that they need to roll back their offshore money and all their money overseas back here in the United States. So he's given them warning.
When he comes to power in his second term, the first thing that's going to change is all offshore accounts are going to be closed if they cannot, and the money will be seized if they have anything to do with us coming in or out of this country if they cannot prove they paid taxes. And when that happens, 65% of the wealth going out of this country into offshore accounts tax-free will come back to Americans, and we will be rich. We wouldn't even have to pay taxes. And if we paid taxes on the New York Stock Exchange properly, we wouldn't have to ever pay taxes, and even our Social Security would be paid for simply by charging the corporate stock market warlord, banker, and brokers for what they're doing. Now, what's Trump's plan? Very simple. They started this too soon. No one in history, in their right mind, would ever raise our interest rates. Now, mind you, they don't. You see, that is the one thing that they can do, because what they let's see, the interest rates aren't our interest rates. They're the rates that the central banks lend money to other banks. It's how the flow of money works. So they don't really raise rates. They raise their rates. Now, when they raise their rates, they get more money on the debt. And since they've raised the rates 7 times in a historic low, and an attack in an historic low in terms of the advice of the U.S. Fed, and during the greatest economic surge in U.S. history, and at the best time, they should simply lower rates to increase this flow. They bought the stock market. They're dumping their stock because they can't shift their gold around. And they raised how much money they're getting off of the debt, the over $20 trillion debt. Every time they raise that, it causes more debt. And every time we have to then print fake fiat currency for whatever reason, whether it be U.S. Treasury bonds buying that or adjusting the currency around the world through the Exchange Stabilization Fund, it doesn't really matter. There is no reason ever to do what they've done except that they're in a war with us. So this gives Trump what we've been waiting for. We were going to go after the central banks and the U.S. Federal Reserve for odious debt because they created a debt that can never be paid. So therefore, according to the U.S. Constitution and according to our laws in this country, if you set up odious debt, it is illegal. But now we go far, far beyond odious debt. You're going on to a conspiracy between the central banks and the stock market and the high-frequency traders to simply manipulate not only our currency, but our whole economy. And to do it in a fashion that's never been done before, which demonstrates the conspiracy, using lack of regulation of the central banks in relationship to what they can do with the stock market, and a lack of regulation of the attempted monetary control through interest rates by the U.S. Fed. So basically, they become our enemy. We don't have to pay them another penny. And by the way, they don't do anything.
No, all they do is print money and squirrel it away for themselves. Now, I have an article attached to this audio. It's an article that we've written a long time ago, but what we were showing you is that the transition from moving from the fake, phony fiat currency that the central banks, the Federal Reserve prints, is going to be replaced, we believe, with a U.S. Treasury. And we see this transition happening already with a $100 bill. When you look at your $100 bill now, the one that has the blue stripe, you will see on one half of it the U.S. Treasury note, and you'll even see gold coloring on it that I think represents that is going to be a gold-backed currency. And then you see the faded kind of fiat dollar portion on the left side. We wrote that article, and we also encouraged people back then, if you're hoarding any old $100 bills, you might want to get them to the bank, spend them, get them out in circulation, get yourself the newer $100 bills. And, all of this was speculation, but as we get closer to see what's going on, I wouldn't trust this fake, phony thing called a Federal Reserve note.
The Federal Reserve is going to crash, and if you have a Federal Reserve note, it will be useless.
I mean, if you go into a coin store, just anybody, many times they'll have books and books on a shelf of all the different currencies that have been around, from the Confederacy and, the Romans and whatever. Fiat currency doesn't last forever because it's based on nothing. It will go away.
We're going to get rid of the central bank here in America, and the U.S. Federal Reserve, replace it with a national bank that is directly connected to the U.S. Treasury, instead of this game that it has to go through the globalists before and get the globalist approval before the U.S. Treasury can do things, which is not really the way it works. It is a lie that the U.S. Federal Reserve controls our monetary policy. They make monetary policy suggestions. It is a lie they control it. That has just been a super, super lie. Now, let's go back to the gold. This is the big trick, okay? And this is why the entire conclave, when I start going on this, they will laugh so hard that they'll split a gut, because we just realized that everything we've been reporting is more than accurate. It is pathetically accurate to the point that you would have to be stupid not to see through this ruse. Okay. The United Nations controls the World Bank, which is also controlled by the International Monetary Fund. And that is basically connected to the World Trade Organization. And all three of those controls pretty much what we'd call the globalist world economy. That was the group, along with the Bank for International Settlements, that was planning to be the globalist control of all economies in all countries through a central bank in every country. Now, remember, there were, a few years ago, 7 countries that didn't have central banks that were either directly connected to Rothschilds or directly connected to asset management companies that owned that central bank that were connected to Rothschilds, Warburgs, Rockefellers, and many other of those warlord bankers, or the central bank belongs directly to the country and oftentimes receives their financial direction from people like George Soros. So one way or the other, almost every country in the world has a central bank answering to the same globalists, except those 7 countries, and we are at war. We've been bombing them. Those are the U.S. enemy. No, that's the globalist enemy, and that's why we call them terrorists, so we can bomb them. Because after you bomb a country, if you go, all you got to do is, don't believe me, go to Wikipedia, look up central banks, and then look up the fact that they all started right after a war, usually a civil war, or a war between a neighbor. And then what happens? Someone has to loan them money to get into debt. And if they win the war, doesn't matter, or lose the war, they're still going to be in debt. And that's when the central bank comes in, creates an odious debt they can never repay, creates their currency, backs up their currency, brings it into the world market through globalism, basically, because it's all the same group of people who own these banks in most cases. Certainly in 80% of the cases, and I'm being very conservative to say that, 80%, it's much more. I just don't have the statistics in my head right now that I can quote infallibly like the Pope. I don't have enough Jesuits around me. Anyway, so what happened? The International Monetary Fund tried to trick China into believing that disgusting civil rights cesspool should be allowed into the International Monetary Fund. Now, why am I upset about this? Because the International Monetary Fund has always been the place where the world currency had been targeted to arise from. So special drawing rights right now is, in fact, the international world currency, but it's on a very large scale in relationship to the World Bank. But special drawing rights, here's the way it works. If you're a member of the UN, they write you basically a bill and you pay it. And then any other club you're in the UN, including the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization, they write you a bill. Literally. How many people you have, what your economy is, what you claim it is, what they think it is. They give you a bill, you get in. For America, they charge us unbelievable amounts of money. And we put it into the International Monetary Fund, through the World Bank. And then, if you're nice, they let you take it out again. And if you're not nice, they keep it and give it to what they say are third world countries, or countries that need it more than you do. Well, they want, the plan was between China and Russia to have a gold-backed yuan and a gold-backed ruble. I believe that's what the Russians use. Anyway, the gold-backed whatever the Russians use. And they were going to use this to become a member of the International Monetary Fund that would make them such a strong member, because we don't have a gold-backed dollar, that they were going to try to take over the world currency with a gold-backed currency. Oh, isn't that interesting? We don't have a gold-backed currency. I'm going to keep repeating that. We don't have a gold-backed currency, but we control the currency of the world. We control the economy of the world. And it isn't just through the petrodollar. It's because we control the currency of the world, 93, 91% at any moment, sometimes going higher. So China tried to manufacture 8,000 tons of gold from thin air through the Shanghai gold market. Now, I just want to point this out so I don't forget this. If you happen to be Chinese and you live in the Shanghai economic zone, you can buy and sell gold for a 17% discount. But somehow, a country who we ripped off all their gold after World War II, which went down to 2,000 tons of gold, magically found 8,000 tons of gold, though they don't have a decent gold mine in all of China, and they don't own one in the rest of the world because the rogue CIA has already cornered those. So, it's fake. So they tried to bring this fake gold-backed yuan into the International Monetary Fund. Well, I predicted that they would get busted because they're stupid. They're not good capitalists. They don't know how to cheat. They're not good robber barons. They're trying to go from totalitarian communism into capitalism without leaving totalitarian communism and socialism and fascism behind. That doesn't work. That's not capitalism. When someone makes a lot of money in the stock market in China, they kill them and take their assets. I'm not exaggerating. China kills anyone who stands in their way that's in their country. And now they're trying to use the One Belt, One Road and the totalitarian, nasty economic attitude of President Xi to control anyone where they've bought assets in their countries through leveraging that is not even short of fascism. So what's really going on? Trump is played them. He played them until they played out their hand with their fake gold. Same thing with Russia. Russia supposedly come up with magical gold. We stole all their gold, not all their gold. We stole their gold twice when the USSR and then later with Russia. I could tell the whole story, but let's just say we stole their gold too, and it did not come back to America. It went to Valmont Bank, which then went to Mitt Romney's Bain Capital, and then was dispersed to the Bush family and others who were part of the gold robbery of Russia, and then the gold robbery of the USSR through Leo Wanta and George Soros. Well, George Soros kept a huge part of his, and Leo Wanta is probably dead, and now there's a fake Leo Wanta. But Leo Wanta used to demand that money be given back to the Americans because the Americans gave the loan to Leo Wanta and George Soros to break the banks and basically the economy of the USSR. And then they did it again with the Vulcans and the Bush family to Russia. So now we're going to do it legally through Trump to China, and Russia has now backed off. China wanted to get their gold-backed yuan into the International Monetary Fund as a reserve currency so that they then could draw down a huge portion because they got a big they got a big economy. They are basically given a big bill to join the IMF. And so we drew them in. We got their money. Trump busted them with the fake gold. Now he's going to cancel the IMF and he's going to use it to collapse China, not on purpose, because we don't want them totally collapsed. And because the feds, the globalists, Hillary, Eric Schmidt, Google, Facebook, they've all
James
Kissinger,
Breyer, don't forget him. He's over there.
James and John and Uli Milner, all of them. They all banked on Russia and China becoming the dominant economic force because they've joined together in some things. And what has happened? Russia has backed off. The sanctions that were put on by Obama are continued by Trump, and more sanctions. And now he's controlling basically the EU. And people don't understand what Trump has done. He basically is collapsing the EU's support for George Soros and the migrant invasion of Europe. And so that is another economic move. He's working to show that Brexit, he went and he said, I'm not doing any deals with anybody, with groups. These are bilateral agreements. So I'm not going to do a bilateral agreement with an illegal European Union with unelected officials taking their orders from George Soros. And I'm not going to do any deals with a totalitarian communist. He went and needed $850 billion worth of deals, Trump did, when he went there. Not one penny went through because Trump put one proviso on it. You must stop stealing our intellectual property, and we will not accept any of your chips, microchips, because we know that they're surveillance chips. Every single deal collapsed. What he tried to show, President Xi, is that just like he showed Saudi Arabia, just like he showed the entire world, he showed NATO, he showed the European Union, he showed Britain, work with me and we'll both be prosperous. Don't work with me and it's going to be hell for you. So China is about ready to go back into the hell that they have been in for a very, very long time. They thought they could come forward with capitalism, with cyber assistant Eric Schmidt, dragonfly control of their people. But what's really going to happen? Trump is not only going to collapse China, he's not only brought Russia to its knees, he's not only brought the European Union to its knees, he's going to simply go default on the U.S. Federal Reserve on that odious debt. In other words, in 1 year, he will essentially make $21 trillion by simply saying the U.S. Federal Reserve is bogus. First, he will freeze their assets of the central banks and the U.S. Federal Reserve.